If you're a fan of the channel, you know I purchased the Viltrox 15mm f1.7 a few weeks ago to pair with my Fuji X-E5. Unfortunately, I was housebound the last couple of weeks for health reasons, so I was not immediately able to take the Viltrox out for a spin. Fast forward to this weekend and I'm finally back on my feet. I thought, what better way to test my new lens for landscape and seascape photos than to take it with me for a drive along Oahu's south shore. I attached my trusty GoPro Hero 11 to the Fuji's hot shoe and headed out to my favorite spots. Turns out there's a high wind advisory for the weekend, so I know there'll be some dramatic waves to take pictures of. If you viewed my previous photo walks, you know I usually try to sync the video so you see the moment before I snap the pic. I'm going to do something a little bit different this time. I'm going to show you the GoPro footage first and then choose the best pics from that angle. Our first stop is Lanai Lookout, and as you may have guessed from the name, on a clear day, you can see the island of Lanai and also Molokai. Now, I love coming to this lookout when we have a south shore swell or high winds like we do today. And the reason why is because I love to see the waves crashing against these cliff sides. The perspective is lost a little bit in the GoPro video, but these cliffs are fairly huge, so when you see these waves crashing up against them, I mean they're shooting fairly high in the sky. As for the camera settings, I'm using my favorite film simulation, Velvia, with no modifications. Although the Viltrox has a maximum aperture of 1.7, since I'm taking landscape / seascape pics and it's very bright outside, I have the aperture set to 2.8. I have my dynamic range set to DR400 to maximize dynamic range since the sun is very bright and the lava rocks in the foreground tend to be darker. With a DR of 400, these shots wind up being taken with a minimum ISO of 500 and very fast shutter speeds, which is perfect for capturing the waves and sea spray. Okay, let's talk about this first picture right off the bat. Because I shot with a 24 to 105mm lens for many years, and now my walk-around lens is my Tamron 24mm f2.8, I was wondering whether or not this Viltrox was going to be a little bit too wide for my taste. As you know, 15mm is equivalent to 22.5mm on a full-frame camera, and I think in certain situations it will be. So for instance, I noticed I had to take extra care to make sure that distracting elements weren't included in the frame, such as this picture here with the signpost on it. So for these series of shots, I did wind up shooting with a digital zoom on the X-E5, that's 1.4 times. That is roughly a 31.5 full frame equivalent focal length. But thanks to the 40 megapixel sensor in the X-E5, you still have 20 megapixels to play around with. As far as picture quality is concerned, I'm really pleased with the color rendition, from the blue of the ocean to the brown and black shades on the cliffs. I had the white balance set to auto, and I think it captured the temperature perfectly. I'm particularly impressed with the overall exposure, especially how the sky and clouds turned out. They aren't blown out, nor is the foreground too dark. I think DR400 worked perfectly for today's outing. The only thing I will mention is that in each of the two series of shots, there are a couple of frames that are out of focus. I had the camera set to continuous autofocus, so I guess it failed to refocus after a couple of waves. Second stop, Eternity Beach and Halona Blowhole. The beach is really named Halona Cove, but since the famous kiss between Burt Lancaster and Deborah Kerr in the 1953 film From Here to Eternity, it's been known more by its nickname, Eternity Beach. Contrary to Lanai Lookout, I like to take pictures here when the winds and the water are calm. That way you can see the water go from a deep blue at the entrance to a nice green and finally crystal clear water near the beach. Unfortunately, with the winds today, we're getting some pretty choppy water. Okay, let's talk about this series of shots. I mean, once again, I'm really impressed with the overall exposure. In the background, you can still see the clouds and where the sun is shining off the horizon, and yet the foreground exposure looks correct as well. I also am impressed by the auto white balance. You can see the white in the cloud, and this sea spray here, I mean, it is exactly white. Now, as I said earlier, it is bright outside. I'm looking at the EXIF data for these shots, and some of them are shot at 1/3000, 1/4000th of a second. So I'm pretty impressed. On some of these, in the original picture, you can see like individual spots of water in the sea spray. So that's pretty impressive. Once again, I'm shooting in Velvia. This is straight out of camera, and the color gradation is capturing what I described earlier. If you look in the background, you can see that there's that deep blue of the ocean, and then as you come into the cove, you see it transition into this green, and towards the right of the frame then you can actually see the reef underneath. I switched locations slightly to get a view of the entire cove and this massive wave coming in. Here's where those extra millimeters of width come in handy. These were shot at about 1/2000th of a second. As you can see, the tourists are coming out of hibernation right now, so let's hurry up and get to the other side of the lookout so we can see Halona Blowhole. So this is obviously a very tough exposure. The camera's pointing directly into the sun over the open ocean, and yet I think the camera did a great job. If you look at the left half of the frame, you can still see the color gradation between the blue and the green. If you look in the foreground, you can see that the bush in front of me is exposed fairly well. Now in the foreground you can see a lot of reflections there on that shelf. I think if I'd had a circular polarizing filter I would have been able to clean up this shot a little bit. But I think again straight out of the camera and lens did a fantastic job. I want to very quickly head back towards Hanauma Bay. I saw someone fishing towards the entrance of the cove, and I just want to show you this picture of that person just to give you a sense of perspective as to how high these cliffs are. Okay, we're currently at Sandy Beach, well known for world-class boogie boarding, bodyboarding, and neck injuries, if I'm being honest, because the waves crash so close to the shoreline. I was expecting a bigger crowd here. I was hoping to get some action shots, but I guess the waves are too choppy for today. I love how in this series of shots you can actually see the sand being churned up within the waves. Here's my attempt at street photography on the beach. We're at Makapu'u Lookout for our last stop of the morning, and we've saved the best for last. This picture shows the best qualities of this camera and lens combo. The rocks in the foreground are well exposed, and you can see the deep blue of the ocean in the bay. But what's really impressive is the background. You can see the morning haze on the horizon, but there's enough detail to see the coastline. And I love how the haze transitions into the clouds, which have perfect white-gray tones, and then gradually into the blue sky. The main attraction, however, are these two beauties. The larger island in the background is called Rabbit Island. Not only does it look like a rabbit's head, but rabbits were actually raised there at some point. The island in the foreground is Black Rock, and both of these are now protected bird sanctuaries. Let's go to the lookout for our last series of pictures. In this first picture, you can once again see the soft transition from clouds to sky with the gray and white mixing perfectly. Also, the detail on Rabbit Island is really good. In this second shot, I'm using the 1.4 times zoom. Although the resolution has dropped to 20 megapixels, the detail on Rabbit Island is still good, and the zoom allows you to see some cliff details on Black Rock. I'm using the 2 times zoom in this final image. There's some loss of detail, but quite acceptable for a 10 megapixel picture. As you can see throughout the series, the color remains perfect. After a morning of shooting, let's talk about the pros and cons of the X-E5 and Viltrox 15mm f1.7 combo. We're actually going to start our discussion with the cons, not only because I want to end on a positive note, but I think my first con might be a little controversial. So one of the advantages of having a camera like this versus, say, my ZV-1 or the Ricoh GR or even Fuji's own XM5, is that it has a viewfinder. So you think that that would be in the Pro column, but I'm actually putting it in the Con column for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's kind of hard to use, and the reason why is because, as you can see here, the viewfinder is just almost flush with the body. So there's no eye cup, there's not much relief at all. So it makes it somewhat difficult to use. I have my A7C2 here, which is interesting because this is the full frame equivalent essentially of this camera, right? It is the 24mm f2.8, so it compares favorably to this camera. And it also has the rangefinder style body. Now, this camera gets a lot of criticism for its viewfinder as well. However, it is actually in a better league than the X-E5 because it does have a little bit of an eye cup here, so it offers a little bit of relief. And then comparing it against, let's bring another camera in here. I'll put that there. So even comparing it to the X100-6, which this doesn't have much of a eye cup either, but at least it has something there. And then this viewfinder too, I believe it has greater magnification, and I believe it also has more resolution. And of course this also has the hybrid optical / electronic viewfinder, so people love that as well. So you don't hear as much criticism for the viewfinder here. Now the other reason why I put it in the Con column is because of the reflections. So I noticed while I was shooting, the sun was kind of in this position here, or maybe sometimes a little bit behind here. And because there's no eye cup here, it really catches the reflections. Even more so than the A7C2, which also does that. So I do notice when I'm shooting with this camera, we do get some reflections in this viewfinder. But what I usually do is I just kind of cup my hand over it like that, and that takes care of the problem. However, I guess again, because there's no eye cup at all, and because it sits flush with the body, I noticed while shooting here, like doing this was not sufficient enough to stop the reflections from going into the viewfinder. I was wearing a bucket hat when I was doing this South Shore photo shoot, and like I said, it wasn't really sufficient just to cup my hand over the viewfinder. What I was doing was, if you can imagine a top-down view, is I was actually putting the brim of the hat over the camera like this. And I had to do that essentially to keep the reflections from coming into the viewfinder. And while the EVF may be a surprising con, the next one is a fairly glaring omission by Fujifilm. At this price point, the camera really should be weather sealed. I've already taken the camera out during a tropical storm morning, and then this weekend we are out on the beach during a high wind advisory. Embarrassingly, I also took a little bit of a spill at Lanai Lookout, and I'd like to have some confidence that this camera could survive those types of situations, particularly since I've already lost my X100F to the Hawaiian weather. As I mentioned, while continuously shooting, I noticed that a few frames were out of focus. I don't know if that's the fault of the camera or the lens, but it did happen. Finally, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I think there will be some circumstances where 15mm is too wide, but then again with the X-E5 you do have the option of using the digital zoom, and I found those results to be quite satisfactory. On to the pros. This camera and lens combination is lightweight and portable. It's not Ricoh GR series portable where it's going to fit in your pants pocket, but then again it may fit in a larger jacket pocket, and it certainly will fit in a small sling. I think this combination may very well replace my ZV-1 as my travel camera. The second pro goes without saying, it's those Fujifilm colors. The reason why I got this camera is because I wanted to do minimal post-processing. I noticed with my Sony cameras, I have to do a lot of post-processing to get the saturated colors I want, and also to get the white balance correct. With the built-in Fujifilm simulations, I don't have to do any of that. I also was very impressed with the dynamic range of this sensor. I've had several Canon APS-C cameras before, and dynamic range seemed to be their Achilles heel. So I was very pleased when I saw that this sensor could handle the bright Hawaiian sunshine as well as the shadows. Finally, I was very impressed with the Viltrox's autofocus. It was silent and very quick. Now, I had mentioned that I had a few shots this morning that were out of focus. I'm willing to chalk some of that up to user error. Perhaps I should have been using single autofocus instead of continuous autofocus. However, I wasn't shooting sports or moving kids, so I don't think that those few out of focus frames were critical. Well, that's it. That concludes our review of the Fujifilm X-E5 and Viltrox 15mm f1.7. If you made it to the end of the video, mahalo, I really appreciate it. If you found any of this video informative or entertaining, please make sure to drop a like and subscribe for future content. Also, if you have any questions at all about the Fujifilm X-E5 or the Viltrox lens, please make sure to put your question in the comments and I'll be glad to answer them. Finally, if you like compact cameras, please make sure to check out my review of my current favorite advanced compact, the Sony ZV-1. I'm going to leave a link to that video in the description and also in the card. Mahalo.